Marcy Belfi. Where's Marcy? She's right over there. We have Brian Stewart. Where's Brian?
Right here.
He's over here. And we have Kent Litcott. Okay, and he's right here. And we have a short video that's going to be shown. Where is... Okay, here he is. Tell me your name.
Jack Albert.
Jack Albert. Okay, Jack Albert's going to show us a short video at the very end. I'm going to start off today. We're going to go in the order that you've seen here. And then I think probably the best thing for us to do is to have the sessions, each session come along. I think we'll have a break in between, yes, with Jessica. Yeah, we will have a break in between. So why don't we do this? We'll have the two sessions first, and then we'll have the break, next two sessions, and then we'll have a little panel that comes up, and people will talk about collectively what we've been doing, and you all get a chance to ask some questions. But if you have some burning questions beforehand, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. Okay. I teach at a community college in Fall River, Massachusetts, so I'm going to go rather quickly through some of these slides. As you see, my presentation is the practical economics for the Anthropocene, educating for resilience. And I teach at a community college, southeastern Massachusetts. We have 4 campuses in e-learning. How many people here work at a community college or have taught at a community college? Okay, so we have a few people. And are people still teaching at a community college now? Is there anyone still teaching at a community college? Okay. How many people, I'm sure there are some of the people who are from other countries may not know the community college system. How many people really feel as though they know the community college system? Okay, so I'm going to give you a little background to help us all be on the same page. Okay. So here are some demographics. In the United States, there are 980 public community colleges. Some are tribal, 35 are tribal, 88 are independent, and we have over 1,100 community colleges in the country. This is a very surprising figure to some people. 41% of all undergraduate students in the United States are in community colleges. 41%. And actually that's down over the last couple of years, but a full 41%. It's stacked with women, 56% versus 44%. 40% of the students are first-time freshmen, and 36% are first-time first generation in their family going to college. These are the age categories. The average age is 28. The median age is 24. 51% is 21 or under, so this is really a non-traditional population that's coming in. 22 to 39 years old, 39%, and 40 years plus, 10%. So we have an older population in general that comes to the community college. We have a lot of ethnic and diversity, racial diversity at the colleges. As you see here, Native American 56, Hispanic 52, and so forth. Matriculation, 59% are attending for credit. They're full-time, 37%, and part-time, 63%. And we have a lot of non-credit students coming. In other words, they're not getting credit, but they're there to get some kind of training or some kind of information to help them with their jobs, so 41%. The associate degrees that were granted in the 2016-2017 period of time, it was 8,033, as you see, and for certificates, over 5,000.
What's the difference?
A certificate is a shorter term. It won't. The usual credit accumulation is 60 credits, but in the state of Massachusetts, you can't be above 29 credits and call it a certificate. So it's a certificate program, which means that, you know, a lot of people come in and they may be a social worker, but for instance, they come into my program, the Sustainability Studies program, to get sustainability information to take back to their jobs. So one is the degree and one is...
you said 5,000, it's 533.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 533,000. Right? Okay. Public community colleges are the best bang for the buck. The average cost is about $3,500 a year. Even the public four-year colleges and universities are far more than that. And of course, coming to a private college or a private university, I don't know what the cost for Wells is, something like 39 or so
Yeah, it's
thousand.
about $40,000.
40,000. If you look at a place like Harvard, it's more like 65 to 70,000 a year. So, and by the way, I live in an area that's a relatively poor area. Taunton, New Bedford, and Fall River are the three main cities. They once were among the richest countries in the world. Okay? With whaling in New Bedford, textiles in Fall River, and silversmithing in Taunton. But all of them, obviously, those industries have declined, and so it's a relatively poor area. So the sustainability studies program that we developed took 4 years to get off the ground. We finally got it started this past fall. And it basically has throughout the entire program an understanding that we're in a paradigm shift with four interrelated realities that are inescapable. Climate change with global warming, finite resource depletions, with the most major one being fossil fuels. We have the reality of the end of growth, which means we have to fundamentally transform into a different type of economic system, and relocalization. And there are two interrelated prerequisites for all of this if humankind is to be part of Earth's future. Humankind must consciously re-enter the space of nature, and we must recognize and actualize ways of living that coincide with the limits of nature. Now the program is, it's a liberal arts / sustainability studies program. There's 9 core courses, 6 of which were brand new that we developed, and 3 existing courses that we pulled in. And then you have to go into a track. You can either go into education or engineering, environmental studies. You see what they are here. And the idea is that you take 3 courses, prescribed courses for each track, for one of those tracks. Each student gets to choose one track. You take the courses within that track, and you apply your sustainability knowledge from the social science basis. That's something I didn't emphasize. What's really important about this program is it comes from the social sciences. It's not in environmental studies, it's not in engineering, but it's from social science. So then you take the social science information and you apply it to engineering or hospitality, ocean science, and so forth. And here are the courses, the core courses. Sustainability and Humankind's Dilemma, Life on a Tough New Planet, which talks about all of the problems that we have facing us. And of course, at the end of the semester, students are really depressed, and they're wondering, you know, what they should do besides kill themselves. And so the next semester is Resilient Sustainability, Preparing for the Future. And we talk about all kinds of things that people around the world are doing that are existing. They're not things that we might hope to do, but they're things that are happening in the world that people are doing that makes a difference. And then sustainability from 12 different perspectives, 12 faculty. There are 12 different faculty who teach this course. And each one of them gets 1 week to talk about the problems within his or her discipline and the solutions that people are coming up with in that area. So we have everything from culinary arts to criminal justice, to health sciences, to sociology, to media, to what else do we have in there? Agriculture, physics, and so forth. And then the next course, science versus pseudoscience, helping students to understand when you read something, when you're looking at charts, when you're listening to information, how do you assess what that information, how valid that information is. And then eco-literacy, education, society, which pulls together the idea that people fundamentally have to have eco-literacy in their life from very young ages all the way up through the life stages. And then sustainability, human rights, and climate change. We have a lot of inequalities that are taking place in the world, and they're only going to heighten, I think, as the constraints become tighter on us. And we're not going to make it on this planet if we don't have climate justice, if we don't have social justice. And we've got to figure out how we're going to do that. So we talk about those issues. That course has yet to be taught. That's coming up this coming fall. Whoops. And then the economics class, sustainable economics, which I'll talk about more in a moment, the rise of the new economy. Then environmental sociology, looking at the built environment. And then finally, the last course that people have to take is a civic engagement course where they take all of the sustainability knowledge that they've gained and apply it to some agency, organization out in the community. So these are the track courses. I'm going to go through these quickly. Education, engineering, environmental studies and health sciences, hospitality, ocean science, sustainable agriculture. We're one of the few community colleges in the country that has a program where you can actually get a degree in sustainable agriculture. And then water and water management. So, the course, Sustainable Economics, the Rise of the New Economy. Now, first of all, I have to say, this is not all solidly in place. This is all in flux. I'm still trying to figure out what this course is going to look like. And as I said, this fall is the first time that's going to be taught, and I'm the one who's teaching it. So this is the course description. I'll read it for you. The course focuses on the contradictions within contemporary capitalism, their impacts on the physical and human environment, and the emerging economic transformation. Issues addressed include the future of economic growth and globalization, biophysical constraints, impacts on consumer society, the rise of natural and human capital, steady state, gift and shared economics, participatory budgeting, relocalization of labor, cooperatives and worker-owned production, emerging small businesses, development of local and regional currencies, bioregional productions, and alternative finance and banking systems. So, and I hope to figure that out by September. Okay, so the fundamental, my fundamental orientation in this is that here we are, we're human society, and we have treated ourselves as though we're separate from nature. We're humans, and then there's nature. And we use it when it's reasonable for us to use it, when we think we need to be exploiting it and so forth. But we're separate from nature. And throughout the entire program, I put humans back into nature. So we have human society, but human society cannot function without economy, and economy cannot function without nature. Virtually everything in this room, everything we touch, everything we do has its origins in nature. It may be 2, 5, 20, 100 times removed, but there is nothing that we have or we do that's not connected with nature. So the road to resilient sustainability. Biophysical and reintegration within nature, and conservation, relocalization, democratization, and renewable energy will get us to economic stabilization, and I think ultimately climate stabilization. So the biophysical reintegration with nature. There's 2 areas that we really focus on. The fact that we need to re-enter the space of nature, that's one. And the second, because of peak oil and other resource depletions, we have to think about and actualize ways of creating new ways of doing what we need to have done. So, degeneration of Earth's soils, destruction of natural capital, degreening the planet. We've been really good at it. Deforestation of grasslands and wetland destruction, industrial agriculture has really done us in, and overpaving and overbuilding on soil. Urbanization and transport systems have done us in as well. We've benefited from them, but we're paying a price. The ecological results is soil depletion, mismanaged, degreened, decarboned, and dehydrated. Disruption of Earth's carbon cycle, disruption of Earth's water cycle, and disruption of Earth's weather patterns. The result, excess CO2 in Earth's atmosphere, heating the planet, and climate change. The soil carbon sponge. It's only fairly recently that I have come to know the work of Walter Jenner, but I have such an enormous respect for him. I hadn't planned on having a co-presenter for this session, but I've decided to have this co-presenter because I have some video from a session that he did at Tufts University in October of 2015. So I'm going to click on this, and And it runs for about 20 minutes, but I'm going to give him my 20 minutes. Okay. So this is Walter Yenna at Tufts University.
Brian and Susan for looking after. And very
He's an
valuable
Australian
chat.
microbiologist.
Let's hope this weekend we can continue that, not just talking here, but then in the workshop. Bit of background, Healthy Soils Australia. We're an NGO, but we're in a sense a network. We connect to 500, 1,000 very, very leading innovative farmers and activists in Australia in this whole business of land regeneration. We work with all levels, you know, like most of it down grassroots innovative farmers, but also up in politics. Our ex-Governor General, you know, that's like the Queen in Australia, when he retired, Major General Michael Jeffrey, he sort of said, look, there's one fundamental thing we must do globally for the future, and that's restore our landscape. And so in a sense he invited us to come on board as the sort of scientific base. And so yeah, we talk into politics at the very, very highest level. Of course they always say yes, 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 but really that's not where the action is. The action is with the grassroots, with you, the people on the ground, because politics is necessary, but the real bottom line is what are the grassroots actions, what are we doing to deliver change where it's critically needed. And as far as critical need, of course, the real issue there is, in a sense, what are we doing in terms of this whole climate crisis, but not climate per se, but the impacts of climate in terms of water, food, habitat, and of course that translates to social stability. And it's really, that's a critical issue, because the crunch will come down that cascade: water, food, habitat, biosystems collapse, social collapse. It's happening now, different parts of the world, and really we've got 10 years, because if we don't, we're going to see, do we lose the means to do that? So it's quite a serious strategic issue, and big news, the positive news is, of course, there are wonderful solutions. But just going into the climate story, just very rapidly scaling down to sort of put it into context, obviously, yeah, the climate's been there for 4.6 billion years. And in a sense, we can look at it and what are the processes that are governing, and that's what's important. But in a sense, our recent climate debate started perhaps in 1958, 1962, and of course Charles Keeling in Hawaii then confirmed, yes, here is CO2 going up. But Charles Keeling also confirmed that it's not just CO2 going up, but you've seen the sawtooth graph. CO2 goes up dramatically every winter in the northern hemisphere as carbon dioxide is released, but every summer, every spring, it comes back down again as green plants draw in carbon and fix it as sugars and cellulose. And so the whole CO2 dynamic, the message that Charles Keeling gave us was the sawtooth, not just CO2 rising, the balance between emissions and drawdown, the balance between our use of carbon and the biosequestration of carbon by biosystems. And it's that balance that we've in a sense disturbed, and when we think of balances, that's something that we can address. So it's a question, how do we restore that balance? But then in 2005, we got another very serious awakening. Jochen Schellenhuber, big conference in Exeter in the UK, and they more or less made the point that, look, things are happening now. Climate extremes, dangerous climate extremes were actually already occurring, and they would accelerate because there's a whole lot of positive feedbacks in the climate system. And these feedbacks were going to lead to things like, yes, more intense storms. And of course you've had them, Sandy and what have you. But in a lot of the world, systemic aridification. You know, how do we actually change rainfall patterns? We've had that since the mid-70s in our Western Australian regions, and you're experiencing that now in California. These are systemic, long-term aridification patterns, and yes, they are at a global scale, they are locked in. And of course, these are all hydrological. And that's the other big message from Keeling, but from the whole climate story. CO2 won't kill us. You know, submariners die when CO2 gets to 10,000 parts per million. But it's not CO2, but it's actually hydrology, you know, that gives life, but it's also hydrology that kills. And in a sense, these extremes, these positive feedbacks, are hydrological. So in a sense, that sort of changes the whole context a little bit. What is it that we can do to avoid these hydrological extremes? And in a sense, that's the paradigm shift that we here this weekend, but in the wider agenda, have to sort of say, look, can we address this problem as nature does on a much more holistic basis? The facts are very clear. We are not going to be able to change and solve this this climate problems through just emission reductions. The sad truth now is we're not even going to change it by just drawing down carbon, because the oceans, for example, they contain 38,000 billion tons of carbon. It's a massive buffer, and as we draw down carbon, the oceans re-equilibrate carbon back into the air. So it's going to take hundreds of years, and we don't have hundreds of years before these dangerous climate extremes impact. So the bottom line is we've got to find something much smarter. We've actually got to actively and safely and naturally cool the climate. And so we've got to change the narrative. We've got to change the debate, the whole inquiry of solutions into how do we actively, safely cool. And in a sense, that's our challenge here today. And it's really quite daunting in a way, but actually when we change the paradigm, it's also very empowering, because now we can go back to nature to say, well, look, how did nature cool the planet? How did it naturally regulate the climate? And of course, when we go back to climatology 101, and you know, a lot of us did that, and before the whole global warming debate, and of course we come to the reality, and it's still there today, that it's actually water. It's the dynamic process of water that governs 95% of the heat dynamics of this blue planet. Okay, and basically water's always been ignored in the recent climate debate because it was assumed that it was so dominant. Because it is so dominant, we humans could not have possibly influenced it to change the climate. So our human-induced climate change was always assumed to be due to CO2. But really, if we've got to cool the planet, we've got to ask the question, have we altered that hydrological heat dynamics? Can we use that to actually help us safely, naturally cool the climate? It's a relatively simple thing if we look at it at that global, bigger picture level. If we actually see that, we've got a sun, and that sun is constantly radiating incident solar radiation onto Earth. At the top of the troposphere, you know, the top of our dominant atmosphere, it's basically 342 watts per square metre of incident solar energy coming in. And our climate's being regulated by 342 watts of energy going back out. But because of our changes to the climate, we are now retaining an extra 3 watts per square metre in the Earth's atmosphere. And that's, in a sense, global warming. That's what we call the greenhouse effect. And so our challenge is, how do we retransmit an additional 3 watts per square metre back out to space? That's less than 1% of that global heat dynamics. So the question in context is, look, it's a 1% systems change. And so while it's obviously at a bigger global scale now, it's a 1% rebalancing of heat dynamics. Can we, by managing the hydrology of the planet, do that safely and naturally? There's another very important thing here. This is a safely and naturally, because we've got another scenario coming on, and this is geoengineering. Because if we don't find a solution here, will we get into that Faustian trade-off to say, no, we have to artificially engineer the climate and start putting pollutants up there. And really, it's a very, very unknown, dangerous, risky consequence. And so can we by all means avoid that by doing it naturally? Okay, and so really what we're trying to talk about, what are the processes that govern the natural heat dynamics of this planet? You know, that 342 watts in and out. How have we changed those natural processes? And in a sense, what can we do to restore those processes? And in a sense, what we're saying here are the potential tools that we have in managing landscapes to do that restoration. Coming back to the punchlines, right up front, the answer is yes we can, right? Yes we can, in a sense, cool this planet safely, naturally, that 3 watts per square metre. Yes we can buffer the extremes that would the hydrological extremes that would otherwise create that crisis. Yes we can draw down carbon through these processes to more than offset the 10 billion tonnes carbon net emissions we've got now. So in a sense, the headline statements I want to say is, yes, there are safe, natural ways. The only thing that's challenging is, can we do it in time? But that's why the urgency and that's why the empowerment of grassroots action in this is so important. Specifically for America, and I'm not here to tell you, of course, in America what has to or could be done, but you've got a fundamental challenge now. You see, you've lost the snowpack on the Sierra Nevadas. It's basically gone. I mean, it'll come back a little bit, but you're going to be threatened with that all the way. So can we find alternative, water capture, water harvesting options, rainfall harvesting options to replace that snowpack? Because 40% of your green food depends on that. Can we manage our forests? So not like this year, that you can avoid those primary forests burning, degrading, and being destroyed. So these are things, and the answer again is yes, we can, but what it means is that we have to change the whole paradigms on which we're thinking and the tools that we're using, because we're not going to do it just by token marginal reductions in emissions. And it's those tools then that we want to talk about, right? What is it that we have to do? What is this range of what are actually 10 hydrological processes that nature uses and that we too can get into, right? And the first primary stepping stone, and it's again so simple, so elegant, and you'll see the logic as we go through these 10, and that's really, how do we restore the Earth's soil carbon sponge? Okay, because if we're talking about managing hydrology, the issue is how do we actually have the water that's available on the land to do these hydrological cooling processes. So the first step is, how do we rebuild the Earth's soil carbon sponge to provide the water for these cooling processes? The second step then is again very logical and simple, because if we've got water in the sponge, then we've got the potential for transpiration, for green plants to take that water and transpire it through their leaves and basically take that water back up into the upper atmosphere. And what is important, that every gram of water that's transpired by those leaves takes up to 600 calories of heat energy from the surface back up into the upper atmosphere, from where it can get dissipated back out to space. So those trees are actually a powerful hydrological air conditioning system. And in a sense, Michael talks about this in the small water cycle, or that point of the latent heat fluxes of heat from the surface going back up into the atmosphere to cool that surface. And it's prodigious, because basically on average 24% of the incident solar radiation naturally gets transpired through these latent heat fluxes up into the upper atmosphere. And we have fundamentally changed that We have fundamentally changed that process by degrading and deforestation vast areas, 75% of the Earth's forests, and we've created 5 billion hectares of man-made desert over the last 10,000 years. So we've fundamentally changed the surface. I'll go quickly through the other ones. There's a whole series, but actually I have a discussion paper that we can put on, the websites and stuff, where we go through each of these, the science behind each of these processes, and also on Sunday. So on Sunday, if people are interested, we can actually have a workshop and detailed questions and answers on all of them. Okay, so basically it's extending the longevity of green growth to keep.
Okay, I'm going to cut it off there, but basically what Jenna is talking about is fundamentally regreening the planet. That we've been looking in the wrong places for where carbon's at in the atmosphere. And we're saying, we've got to conserve, we've got to conserve, we've got to conserve. And guess what? We're not conserving, we're not conserving, we're not conserving. At the Mauna laboratory, just a few weeks ago, we found that it was up to 410 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere. A year ago, it was 406 parts per million. Climatologists tell us there's 350 parts per million that we should be no higher than. And James Hansen, who's probably the foremost climatologist in the world, says it's 300 parts per million. So the issue is, I mean, when we're thinking about this course and this program, there are the two critical things. One is climate change, the other is peak oil. Peak oil really messes our lives up because we have to just reorient all kinds of things. But climate change could ultimately mean extinction. And that's why I put so much focus on climate change at the beginning of our whole program and thinking about this. And then we move into peak oil, and so we fundamentally have to rearrange everything that we do, including re-entering ourselves into nature so that we understand weather patterns, water patterns, the fact that we've messed up the carbon cycle, and as a result we've messed up the water cycle of the planet, and as a result we're getting massive storms in some places and massive droughts in others with all the fires and so forth. So how do I go? How can I move from here? Okay, so that was the climate change story, or the carbon soil story. And now we have the peak oil story. And I don't think I really need to go into that story here because I suspect that the vast majority of everyone knows the peak oil story. We're in deep doo-doo, okay? And as we talked about yesterday, as Charlie was talking about yesterday, we're not getting the kind of information out there in the world understanding how much doo-doo we really are in terms of the depletion of fossil fuels. And the urgency of our recreating systems to accommodate that reality. Okay, so what must we do? Well, we need to build economic, natural, and social capital. And we can do that first and foremost by agriculture, by soil regeneration, creating nutrient density and rehydration that helps not only with agriculture, obviously, but with the planet in terms of the water system. We talk about in this class the CSAs, community-supported agriculture, farmers markets, farm stands, urban farming, guerrilla gardening, all of these things that you see, and how to get these things up and running.
What's a guerrilla garden?
A guerrilla garden is where you see space that's been vacant for a period of time and you decide you're going to take it over and grow something. Okay, and we can do that all through community college training. Through the degree and certificate programs, we actually have a sustainable agriculture program at the college. Through master gardening programs, which are non-credit, but it teaches ordinary citizens how to think about soil, water, seeds, and so forth. Food awareness, we have a couple of generations that are unaware of what food is and where it comes from. You know, a salad is something that's in a plastic bag that's already there, and salad dressing is something in a bottle, and you've made a salad. There's not. It's something as simple as a salad becomes, these packaged items. And then, of course, cooking classes. You have a vegetable, and you think, what the hell do I do with this thing, right? We have to get people understanding how to deal with food. We need to create cooperatives, producer cooperatives, And these deal with farming, fishing, forestry, lumber, carpentry, and so forth. And worker cooperatives. The next job, once I leave this job in about 5 years, my next job is to go into worker cooperatives and get some programs up and running in the community so that people own the work that they're doing. That work is not going to be sent out to another country, outsourced. People are not going to foul their environment, and they'll have job security. And as you see, there's several other types of cooperatives, and it's a growing movement in the United States. It's far from being dominant, obviously, but when we look at credit unions, for instance, more than 9,000 people, 9,000 credit unions across the country. How many people here belong to a credit union? Okay, I really urge people to join a credit union, because you're keeping money in your community when you do that. Okay? The benefits of co-ops. It builds community, creates local networks, it democratizes ownership in sectors of the economic exchange, it generates local wealth, it fosters ecological best practices, it localizes consumption and production. You know, every time we go and buy something at Target or Home Depot, that money's out of the community. It's no longer within our community. It provides opportunities for education, training, and information sharing, and it stabilizes employment. And then we also need to facilitate small-scale enterprises, individual, family, and co-owner enterprises. And we can do that through slow money, the Grameen Bank. Is everyone familiar with the Grameen Bank?
No.
You have to be poor to borrow money from this bank. If you have any assets, you can't borrow. This was put together by Mohammed Yunus. He's in Bangladesh, and he looked around him after getting a PhD here in the United States in economics and realizing that all the economic theory that he had learned didn't apply one iota once he got back home and looked at all the productivity that was going on and the level of poverty that was going on. And so he developed something called the Grameen Bank, where you have to be poor to borrow the money, and they have a 98% return rate. Credit unions and local banks, state or city loans, community ownership. We need to have new systems of exchange, bartering in time banks and local currencies. I think people probably know what bartering is, but time banks, it's like accumulating money, only you accumulate time that you trade off for other activities. So for instance, perhaps you're a gardener and I make business cards, and perhaps, I don't know, you're a barber, okay? You know, and so we work out through time the different kinds of exchanges that we can do. Also local currencies. The Berkshires in Western Massachusetts is one of the best known local currency in the United States, as well as Ithaca Hours right down the road. We need to get taken care of things in a different way. Community repair days. A lot of communities now are developing a day where you can bring in a something that gets repaired. It might be your toaster, it might be a lawnmower or whatever, but people knowing how to repair things. Instead of having a throwaway society where you throw away everything from the latest watch that you got that doesn't work anymore to people by putting them in jail, you do something, you know, valuable with people and with things. So community repair days, gifting activities. I do this all the time. It's something I'm not using anymore. What do I do with it? I put it out on the sidewalk, and you know something? It always goes, right? It always goes. Whether it's a chair or a blender or whatever, it goes. Neighborhood lending systems, shared tool sheds, the tool sheds, and then small appliance and cooking equipment libraries. And we need to relocalize life. That doesn't mean that we never go anywhere, that we never get something from somewhere else, but our lives need to be more localized. And this broadens the concepts of what it means to have a real economy where people are at the center and not profits. It creates opportunities and pathways. It democratizes social and economic interactions and encourages inclusivity, social diversity, and social justice. We're not going to have a viable future without the last of these things. It also grows vital networks, promotes neighborhood and community building, reintegrates people with nature, and brings sustainability and resilience into everyday life. You know, I tell my students all the time, everything that needs to be done is doable, but only if we change our thinking and behaviors to coincide with nature and do it quickly.